numbers and the tallies of what happened. So, James, what are some final numbers?
Well, the casualty numbers at Chattanooga are pretty close, actually. So it's not like the Union inflicts 5 times as many casualties or even twice as many. The Union ends up with 6,000 casualties, so pretty big losses. The Confederates lose about 6,500. This is a much lower total than in many battles. We saw that this is way less than you had at Chickamauga, and certainly less than battles like Shiloh, Antietam, Gettysburg, but it's still significant. But here's the key. As you mentioned before in the quote from Grant that you just read, Chattanooga is now irretrievably lost to the Confederates. And Longstreet's attack on Knoxville failed, by the way. I kind of hinted at that earlier, but it doesn't work out. Longstreet's going to end up back with Robert E. Lee's army. Another very significant thing is not only is Tennessee firmly in Union hands now, but all rail connections between the Confederate East and West are severed. That is a major blow to the Confederacy. So no more of this putting some of Lee's army in a rail car and shipping over to the West. That's done. That's not going to happen anymore. And this is the third major defeat for the Confederacy in the summer and fall of 1863. The Confederacy lost the Battle of Gettysburg, they lost Vicksburg, and now they lose here at Chattanooga. And it is just a 1-2-3 punch. And as you said, I think that quote you read by was it a young captain or lieutenant? I don't know. The Confederate soldier realizes that things are looking really, really bad now. It seems like the war may be heading to a conclusion, although, as we're going to see, Lee and some of the other Confederate generals are going to have something to say about that. Now, after the battle, I will say this for Bragg. Bragg wasn't a total idiot. He admitted fault for the defeat. Davis finally breaks down and removes Bragg from command, and he replaces him with, you guessed it, Joseph Johnston.
He's always there.
He's always there.
Always a bridesmaid, never a bride, but he finally gets his chance. Yeah,
once again, he's going to get a shot to do something. Bragg goes to Richmond to become Davis's chief military advisor, so he kind of gets, quote unquote, kicked upstairs, but for the primary reason of getting him off the battlefield. And I have to tell you a little joke about Bragg. When I was an undergraduate at UT Austin, I took my first Civil War class, and there was a teaching assistant in there, and he was talking. I was talking to him one time, and he said, "You know when the Confederacy lost the Civil War?" And I said, 1865. I don't know. Is he talking about maybe 63 with Vicksburg and Gettysburg and Chattanooga? Well, what is he talking about? He says, no. He says the Confederacy lost the Civil War in 1848 when a Mexican shell landed in Braxton Bragg's tent and did not explode. I told that to a couple guys when I was at Shiloh recently, and including the park ranger, and they cracked up, and everybody else was just looking at us like, what?
Yeah. I get that reaction a lot from people of like, okay, move along, nerd crew. But
right, yeah, you have to be a history nerd. But it's Bragg had been in the Mexican War like a lot of Civil War generals, and it really is true. There was a shell that fell into his tent. It did not explode, and had it exploded, maybe somebody else would have been in command at this point. Who knows? But that's obviously a big exaggeration. But Bragg really, really screwed up here. And another thing that comes out of this battle is that Grant's reputation as the greatest Union general is confirmed. William T. Sherman said later, "It was a great victory, the neatest and cleanest battle I was ever in, and Grant deserves the credit for it all." And yet, one thing about Grant is, and this is shown in the quote, the proclamation that you just quoted, Grant, one of his great talents as a leader and as a commander was that he was willing to share credit. He didn't say, well, it was all me. He gave credit to his subordinates. He gave credit to his individual men, and he raised their morale that way. He said, you guys did this. It was your bravery. He was very modest. Grant didn't have this big ego like Bragg did and like a lot of other Confederate, and not just Confederate, also Union. We've seen George McClellan as a primary example of a big egotist.
Yes.
Grant was not like that, and that's one of his marks of greatness, in my opinion. And another thing that comes out of here is, I've already touched upon this, but this makes it even more so. We see some some guys that had been lower level generals that are starting to really rise to the top now and are going to have a big impact on the Union effort in the future. People like George Thomas, especially him, William Sherman, Philip Sheridan, and some others that we're going to mention in our next episode that I won't mention now. The cream of the Union Army is starting to rise to the top, whereas in the Confederacy, the cream is starting to disappear. It's starting to die off, and there's just not this cream below the top level that's rising up. There's nobody there. It's kind of like, I'll use a baseball analogy. If you have this you have a great team. Let's say your starting 9 is amazing, but 3 of them get hurt. You don't have anybody in AAA to bring up to replace them, then you're in trouble. So that's kind of what's happening with the Confederacy. If you'll allow me the baseball analogy, the Confederacy doesn't have a lot of talent at the farm club at AAA. So they are really starting to hurt.
Hey everyone, Scott here. One more brief word from our sponsors. Yeah, if you don't have a good farm team, this is very bad for the Confederacy. And on a macro level, the significance of these two battles, the Confederacy doesn't have as many chances. It doesn't have as many mulligans as the Union does due to what we've mentioned before, the lack of manpower, the lack of resources. Gettysburg was, of course, a setback. There's no question about it. But the problem with Chickamauga and Chattanooga is the Confederacy is quickly running out of opportunities to slow Union momentum and to tamp down on the sense that Union victory is really coming along. They're not going to get that many more chances. Later battles, they'll have much more destructive effects of the battles. But in terms of grand strategy, this is a major setback. So, and just to recap what we've talked about with this episode and the previous episode with Chickamauga, the Confederacy misses chances to trap and destroy Union armies at Chattanooga after the Confederate victory at Chickamauga. And this is due to the blunders of delaying Longstreet's reinforcements of Bragg on the eve of battle.
And the quarreling, Bragg just can't get his officers on the same page, and he himself is a difficult person, yeah.
Right, and the Confederacy doesn't attack the Union Army before it's resupplied. Then when the reinforcements arrive, there's other opportunities. Due to all these factors, these blunders are compounded by Lee not sending additional reinforcements to probably one of the most critical points in the national struggle. So what this does is open up the door for Sherman's march to the sea, which we'll look at later. But I want to mention one last thing here, because I always like this local color and letters of soldiers who were there on the battlefield and seeing things through their eyes. So there's a surgeon in the Army of Tennessee, John T. Ferris, who writes from winter quarters at Dalton, Georgia on the day after Christmas in 1863. This illustrates the despondency that the Confederacy feels after Grant's successes at Chattanooga. And he writes, "Our cause is lost, certain, and I would just now say that I do not know, but it will be as well. I am of the opinion that, should we gain independence, that we would have a tottering of aristocratic government, and many are of this opinion. From what I can learn, this whole army was yesterday and night before last in the same condition as our brigade, all drunk and shamed forever. I also understand that 1 major and 4 privates were killed dead by accident shots of drunken rowdies. God knows you can have no idea of what took place yesterday, last night, and the night before. I am troubled at the way everything is going. If I had known at the beginning of the war what I know now, I today would have been in Canada making an honest living. God knows I wish I were there now." So some people are not handling this well. But
he's wishing he had dodged the draft.
Run to Canada, be a draft dodger. This is not a 20th century phenomenon, but it goes back much earlier. So,
yes.
But always, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves because we have the benefit of hindsight how the war is going, but inevitable to us here in the 21st century. But we want to keep in mind what it looks like from the vantage point of 1863 and 1864. Are things really that inevitable to all parties involved, or is there still hope that the effort could be turned around? And we'll get into that in future episodes. But James, where does this series take us next episode?
We're going to continue in the West. We're going to just pick up right where we left off with Joseph Johnston now in command of the Confederate Army in Dalton, Georgia. And we're going to see that General Grant is going to be promoted again. He's going to move to the east, and where he's going to lock horns with Robert E. Lee. We're going to talk about that much later. We're going to save that for last. So we're going to focus on General Sherman. Grant is going to put Sherman in command of the Western armies, and Sherman is going to lead a masterful campaign toward Atlanta. We'll see what he does next time.
All right. See you then. All right. Well, that was the episode for today. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. First of all, I'd like to thank the Knowlton's Rangers, and especially our spy masters, Baron Fraser, Carl from Norway, Chris from Maine, and Melissa Sarnowski, and I'll explain what that means in a second. If you want to support the show and help me keep producing this content, there are 4 easy ways for you to do it. 1, subscribe to the show and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. If you want to do that, you can go to historyunpluggedpodcast.com, and there you'll find instructions. 2, join our Facebook group, which you can find if you just search for History Unplugged. And please like and share posts that I put up about new episodes. 3, submit a question to me so that I can answer it on air. You can email me at info@historyonthenet.com or leave a voicemail. And again, go to historyunpluggedpodcast.com and you'll find instructions. Lastly, and I think this one is the best, is to become one of the Knowlton's Rangers. The Knowlton's Rangers were an elite reconnaissance and espionage detachment of the Continental Army in the Revolutionary War, but it's also the name of the History Unplugged membership program. Learn how to join by going to patreon.com/unplugged. So here's what you get if you become one of the Knowlton's Rangers. If you join at the level of Scout, you can get early access to new podcast episodes, along with enjoying absolutely every single episode of the History Unplugged podcast ad-free. All 270 and counting episodes. If you join at the level of Intelligence Officer, you can also get access to premium episodes, like a multi-part series on the life of Audie Murphy, the most decorated combat soldier in World War II, or the 10-part series Ottoman Lives, a series that looks at the cast of characters that made up the Ottoman Empire, such as the Sultan, the eunuch, the harem servant girl, and the soldier. And finally, if you join at the level of Spy Master, you get all the same stuff as the Scouts and Intelligence Officers, but you also get a shout-out to you and or your business at the end of each episode, a 3-pack of hardcover history books, plus you'll be put at the very front of the line for me to answer your question about history, and I can guarantee I will dedicate an episode that's about an hour long or so to your question. Sign up at patreon.com/unplugged. Again, that's patreon.com/unplugged. Anyway, those are the ways you can help out the show. Thank you so much for your support. Thanks for listening to the History Unplugged podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the show to get your daily dose of all things history related, from ancient Greece to the Cold War. We'll see you next time at the History Unplugged podcast.